Alright guys, my name is Kuma, and welcome back to another in-depth deck guide, this time featuring the magnificent Melodious archetype. This archetype is based on classical music, with all of the monsters being named after something relevant to that theme, and it plays kind of odd compared to a lot of modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks. It is not focused necessarily as much on the actual disruptions, though it does put a few on the board. It's much more focused on instead making your entire board huge and unable to be removed. Basically, all of your stuff becomes towers, and you have a couple of disruptions just in case. With that, let's get started. First up is Refrain. Refrain is our weakest starter in the deck, but it is a card that you need to see every single time that you are trying to combo off. Refrain lets you search your deck for any other Melodious monster and add it to hand, which is great just as a starter. It gets you to your first major extender that we'll talk about in a second. Of note is the fact that Melodious has 2 pendulum cards. It is not necessarily a pendulum archetype, but it does use pendulum summoning and the pendulum scales. I really like this deck as a kind of baby's first pendulum archetype. Like, it uses the mechanic a little bit so you get used to it, but it doesn't go whole hog on it like Pepe or anything like that. And Refrain's pendulum effect is that if she is in a scale, you can just send any Melodious monster from your deck to the graveyard, which is very relevant. This is not the most graveyard focused archetype, but it definitely uses it, and it utilizes actually some looping because it has some old cards that do not have once per turn restrictions, and we'll see those soon. Refrain has a third effect that it shares with Couplet, the other scale, that if a Melodious fusion hits the field while it is in the extra deck, it scales itself. That means that you can summon this card as an actual monster, use it as fusion material, and it immediately sees the card that you fused into and scales itself. It's a very neat little effect and actually allows you to use both sides of the card. So our next card is our best extender, Couplet, who is Refrain's partner in crime. As the high scale of the Melodious archetype, if added to hand, she allows you to reveal herself and special summon a level 4 or lower Melodious monster from hand or graveyard. That means if you add her off of Refrain, you immediately get a free special summon as long as you have something else to special summon. Even if you don't, it's not a huge deal because you are trying to scale her immediately. And when you scale her, she allows you to search for any Melodious archetypal spell. There are not actually a lot of them, as you'll see. A lot of Melodious's best cards do not have the archetypal name Melodious in them, but she searches the only one that really matters. Like Refrain, if she is in the extra deck and she sees a fusion monster hit the field, she scales herself. That includes if she has already been scaled, so you can scale her, search for the spell, scale her again off of her own effect. It's a really neat effect, especially with the spell that she actually searches. We'll get to that. Of note is that if you have Couplet scaled, you can only pendulum summon light monsters. Not the worst restriction in the game, you can still special summon them from extra deck or hand other ways, but just be aware you cannot get fairies that are not light if you have Couplet scaled. Next up is Soprano. Soprano is one of our actually multiple archetypal fusion spells. Most of the Melodious cards actually have an effect when they are special summoned but are unable to special summon themselves. These are intended to be activated via their starters or pendulum summoning more often than not, and Sopranos is that when she is special summoned, you can target a Melodious monster in your graveyard and put it back in your hand. She also, once per turn, soft once per turn, very important, she can fusion summon using Melodious cards you have on the field, including herself. Next up is Sonata. Sonata special summons herself from hand. No once per turn clause on that, you just have to have a Melodious monster on the field, making her a recyclable extender. And while she is on the field and has been special summoned, say through her own effect obviously, all of your fairies gain 500 attack and defense, making all of your Melodious monsters quite a bit bigger. Next up is Tam Tam the Melodious Diva. We play one Tam Tam, she's kinda take it or leave it, and her effect is that when special summoned, as long as you control another Melodious monster, you can add polymerization from deck or graveyard to hand. Since neither that nor the polymerization itself has a once per turn clause on it, you can actually loop that and just keep going because it grabs it right back out of the graveyard. Her other effect is less important, but if you use her to fusion a Melodious card, you can target a Melodious monster you control, make it lose 500 attack, and burn the opponent for 500. Almost never comes up, almost never matters, but sometimes the opponent only has 400 health left and you need to burn them a little bit. Hey, who am I to judge? Our next card is going to be Chopana. Chopana is one of our Melodious Maestras, which the name actually definitely matters when you are doing fusion summons. Some of our fusions require a Maestra, some of them only require Melodious names, keep that in mind. So she is one of our Maestras, and she has a soft once per turn to target a light fairy in your graveyard and add it to hand. She does Xenolock you out of all non-light monster effects the turn you use it. You can't even use like Ash Blossom. That's one of the reasons that we run so many spells and traps in this deck rather than a whole ton of monster hand traps, because we can't use most monster hand trap effects with Chopana in the same turn. We can also not use other engines. In general, Melodious is fairly xenophobic. It likes to play with its own cards. That's okay, because it's a strong enough archetype on its own that you don't really need to add in extra engines to get the job done. It'll get you there in most cases. It was actually considered a pretty strong strategy for just a little while there. Even now, it's very high rogue, and I've won locals with it. It's, you know, it does work. So, our next two cards are part of what is known as the Elegy Aria lock, and they are thus named Elegy and Aria. These two divas have incredibly powerful effects when they are special summoned, but they are unable to special summon themselves, so we have to get them out some other way, such as pendulum summoning or our extra deck link monster. But the reward is very worth it, considering when they are special summoned, Elegy protects all of your Melodious monsters that have been special summoned from being destroyed by card effects. She also grants all of your fairies 300 attack. And Aria, when special summoned, makes all of your Melodious monsters unable to be targeted by card effects or destroyed by battle. That means none of your monsters can be targeted, destroyed by card effects, or destroyed by battle, and they all gain a significant attack boost as well. That makes your board incredibly difficult to actually get rid of. I've won games on the back of people just being unable to deal with Aria specifically. Like Tenpai just sometimes cannot deal with these two cards together, and they just have to, you know, hand you the victory. So that is it for our monsters in the main deck. Honestly, you could, in theory, run fewer Sopranos, Sonatas, and even like one less couplet maybe. But the problem is that Melodious is kind of an old archetype, and they don't have a lot of really good cards. And while our best starters are our spells, if you don't run enough bodies, you actually can like risk bricking. So while we want to be searching Soprano and Sonata, we don't even necessarily really need the Tam Tam. We want to be searching couplet. It does help to have a critical mass of bodies in the deck, just in case you don't open one of our true starters, you can still get going, or, you know, if you get interrupted, having couplet in hand can be backbreaking for an opponent that's already wasted their Ash Blossom on your refrain. So You know, keep in mind we don't technically need this many bodies, but you will brick a lot more if you don't have them. So now onwards to our archetypal spells, and the first is a real doozy. We're talking about Ostinato. Ostinato is well known as one of, if not the best starters in the entire game. And Ostinato reads that if you control no monsters, you can immediately fusion summon from your extra deck a Melodious Fusion using 2 monsters from hand or deck. So this allows you to fuse right into your playmaker without any setup, without requiring points of interaction that the opponent can interrupt on. And it's not even once per turn. So if the opponent hits Ostinato with a Ghost Bell, which it is vulnerable to if they hit it with an Ash Blossom, you can just drop another one and pretend you didn't even see it, and they don't have that resource anymore, and they're kinda screwed. Because Ostinato is literally full combo. We do not want or need any other extenders if we are using Ostinato. It gets us, like you saw in the showcase, to our exact end board that we want, no questions asked. But the one restriction is that if you still have the fusion summon monster, which you won't, on the field that you use this effect for, on your end phase, you destroy it and special summon all of the materials that you used for it from the graveyard. Honestly, almost never comes up. If Ostinato resolves, you're going to be doing something extra, and you don't care. Next up is a weaker starter, but still quite a good one. This is First Movement Solo. As you can see, neither of these cards have the word Melodious in their name, so they are not searchable. So First Movement Solo, if you control no monsters, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Melodious monster from hand or deck. This one does have a once per turn clause, and it also locks you into special summoning only Melodious monsters for the entire turn. But it gets you a Refrain. It's just, think of it as 3 extra copies of Refrain that do not require your normal summon for the turn. It's pretty good. In fact, Ostinato, Solo, and Refrain make up the 9 primary starters you have in this deck, which honestly is a little bit low for a modern tiered strategy. That's why we play so many copies of the extra monsters that you don't really need, just because you're not always going to have one of your 9 cards, and you want something else to get you going. And any 2 of these guys will get you going just the same. So it's weird. It's a little weird because the strategy is old, and so it has very powerful old cards with not hard ones per turn effects on it. But, you know, it has new support that allows it to be played as a new deck, but it doesn't have like quite as many starters as you want, but it's incredibly powerful when it actually gets there. Our last archetypal card is Melodious Concerto, and we play 2 copies. Concerto is one of our newer support cards, and it allows you to fusion summon a fairy fusion from your extra deck using materials from your hand, field, or pendulum zones, which is a first. And its second effect is that if a Melodious Fusion monster is sent to the graveyard while this card is in your graveyard, you can put this on the bottom of your deck and draw a card. You can use each of these effects once per turn. Concerto is really good at chain blocking, specifically Baka, when it gets sent to the graveyard, and you'll see that in our combos. You probably did already in the showcase. Next up, we have 1 Polymerization, because this is a fusion deck and it is searchable off of Tam Tam. We also play 17 pieces of non-engine in this deck. Again, the deck has quite a bit of space for it, but you don't want to play too much because then you get really bricky hands. As an aside, I do want to specifically mention Herald of the Orange Light. Herald of the Orange Light is an incredibly powerful hand trap that allows you to negate and destroy, but you have to have another fairy in hand to use it. You have to discard both the Herald and an extra fairy from hand to actually use the effect, which is pretty costly, but it can completely derail someone's entire combo, and it's not even once per turn. This is the other reason we play so many copies of cards that otherwise could be one-ofs, because we want to discard them to Herald of the Orange Light if we just happen to open an extra. Just make sure that you are not discarding Refrain if it is your only starter. Moving on to our extra deck, we have 2 Bloom Harmonious the Melodious Composers, This is the archetype's one link monster. It functions as an extender, but you don't really want to use it for that unless you absolutely have to. Because what this card does is when it is link summoned, you can discard one card and special summon any two Melodious monsters that have different levels from your deck to the zone it points to. The monsters have to come in defense position, and this locks you completely into special summoning Melodious monsters for the rest of the turn. It also has a very niche effect that makes it so if you attack with a Melodious monster it is pointing to, the opponent cannot activate effects until the end of the damage step. But mostly you are using this to summon two Melodious. You want to, in the best case scenario, use this to summon both Aria and Elegy to get the lock established. But that is not always feasible. Oftentimes you can get one of those as well as a starter or extender if the opponent has interrupted your combo, or you just open a non-optimal starting hand. And then the other card you get is whatever extender you need to actually keep going. Outside of Bloom Harmonist, we have a whole plethora of fusion summons. Bloom Diva used to be the boss monster for this archetype, and she's still really good to have, but we aren't normally fusing right into her herself anymore. But you still want one because you can get her for free off of our newest boss monster. And Bloom Diva is for all intents and purposes, a Makonko card. She cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect, and you take no battle damage from attacks that involve her. But if she battles a special summon monster, then after damage calculation, you can inflict damage to the opponent equal to the difference between those monsters' attack. So say she swings at a Blue Eyes, hits the Blue Eyes, you don't take 2000 damage, the opponent does, and she is not destroyed. She's a Makonko as a boss monster in a non-Makonko archetype. That's really what she is, and that makes her really good against going second decks. Next up is Bloom Prima, the Melodious Choir. Note that both of these cards and our real boss monster that we'll get to last require a Melodious Maestra. In this deck, if you're ever actually summoning these guys, it's always going to be off of Chopina. She's the only Melodious Maestra we play in the main deck, and you don't want to use your Maestras from the extra deck normally to go into these guys. Bloom Prima is kind of the weakest of the cards. She's here mostly because she enables one-turn kills a lot easier than anything else in the deck, but she has no disruptions or anything really to bring to the table. What she does do is hit really hard on a clear board. For starters, for each material you used for her special summon, she gains 300 attack. That's normally going to be 2 monsters. That puts her at 2500 attack. She can also attack twice during each battle phase with no restrictions whatsoever. That means she's pumping out 5000 damage normally. And that's not even taking into account any of the buffs you have coming from Sonata or Elegy. So she puts out a lot of damage in this deck. But she has no disruptions and no protections or anything, so we don't go right into her unless we're going in for the kill. She does, however, have a float effect that if she has been fusion summoned and then sent to the graveyard, you can target any Melodious monster in your graveyard and add it to hand to get you going again. Again, you don't summon her unless you're already going for the kill, so you don't see the effect very often, but it's good to keep in mind. Next up is possibly the most important card in the entire deck and one of the newer support cards. Baka, the Melodious Maestra, makes this deck tick. You can fusion into her with any 2 Melodious monsters, and when she hits the field, all of your fusion summoned Melodious cards cannot have their effects negated, which includes herself. But she's not here just to protect your fusion effects. She also, when special summoned, special summons any Melodious monster from deck straight to field. This means that whatever the gap in your strategy, what you don't have, you can immediately go get, and you're pretty much always going to get Chopina to get her in rotation and start bringing things back from the graveyard. But sometimes you have to go into, say, Sonata to get the free fusion summon to keep going, because Baka is not really a boss monster on her own, but she does have another effect. When she's sent to the graveyard as material for anything, you can target any Melodious monster in your graveyard and special summon it back back to the field. That means that you can use materials for her and then use her as materials to get back more materials to just go, 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 go. Next up are our actual boss monsters that we are trying to get to for our end board, starting with Schuberta the Melodious Maestra. Schuberta has a simple but potent disruption effect. Once while she is on the field, not once per turn, you can target up to 3 cards in a graveyard, banish all 3 of them, and give her 200 attack for each. Triple DD Crow messes with a significant number of decks in the metagame, or even rogue decks. Like, sometimes a triple DD Crow gets it done, and her once while it's on the field does not matter too much because of our other main boss monster who is able to reset that effect for us. Flowering Etoile the Melodious Magnificat is our strongest boss monster that we can put on the field nowadays, and she has a quick effect to banish any number of Melodious you have on the field until the end phase, and then disjointed from the first part, you can return that many cards your opponent controls to the hand. That means she can be used to protect your board in the event that the opponent is trying to sweep the entire thing, or she can be used as disruption, bouncing back a bunch of stuff to the opponent's hand. She also can be activated at any time, on the opponent's turn, on your turn, during the main phase, during the battle phase, during the end step. Whenever you want to use her, she is there and ready to go. She also has a floating effect that allows you to special summon a Melodious fusion monster from your extra deck when she is sent to the graveyard. That will almost always be Bloom Diva. The floating effect is not the main reason that you use her, but it is really nice for just like putting a halt on what the opponent is trying to do until you can get back into the game. Our last 4 extra deck monsters see a lot less play, but they have particular niche things that they're in here for, and remember that we Xenolock ourselves a lot, so we can't normally go into cards that are not Melodious cards anyways. But Baguska gets to be an honorary Melodious card, because if the opponent disrupts your primary combo, all you're trying to do at that point then is slap 2 4s together into Baguska, set him in defense mode, and ride out the next turn until you can try again. Baguska should really need no introduction, but his primary effect is that if he is summoned in defense position, neither player can activate any monster effects of any monsters in defense position. They all get negated, and he turns all monsters on the field into defense position, meaning that the only cards that can actually play while he's on the field are link monsters. So if the opponent is not a link deck, and even if they, need to use effects on the field to get materials to link into, he just stops them completely. His lesser used effect is that if he is in attack position, he cannot be destroyed by card effects or targeted. Next up is SP Little Knight. Little Knight is good to go into off of Baguska on turn 3 when you're starting to combo again. Then we have Linkuriboh, whose sole purpose is to get rid of IB, basically. Like, if the opponent tries to give us something that would stop us from playing, we can get rid of it off of Linkuriboh. Again, we're mostly only using the Melodious cards in the extra deck, but, sometimes you gotta get rid of a floodgate that the opponent has donated to you, and Linkuriboh's here for that purpose. And lastly, we have Gravity Controller, who is kind of weird and niche, but he's good in this deck, because what Gravity Controller does is you special summon him using a non-link monster in the extra monster zone, which can possibly be a pendulum summoned creature, or it could be one of our fusions, and as long as it is in the extra monster zone, it can't be destroyed by battle, and then if it battles anything, it allows you to return itself and whatever it's battling to hand. And so the point is that he allows you to out towers from the extra monster zone without targeting. He's a little bit niche, but again, we have extra space in the extra deck, and he does come up once every few games. Again, I'm not going to really talk about the sideboard, it's just full of a bunch of going second and specific hand traps for matchups. Right now, if you're playing in the TCG, Lancea and Droll and Lockbird can probably be main decked because you're fighting Ryziel and Malice most of the time, and that's who these guys are for. You can also play Perulia in the main deck, but remember, we cannot use some of these effects on turns where we do most of our combos. So that is it for the actual deck list, guys. Now we're going to go into a couple of combos. You already saw what Ostinato can do at the start, and you should be able to piece that together, so I'll just be showing you Refrain and First Movement solo combos to close out the video. Alright, so we're going to be starting with our 1-card refrain combo. Technically it's a 1.5 card combo, but we do get a refund through Concerto's second effect during the combo, so we end up with 4 cards in hand at the end of the turn anyways. Let's get started. We're going to normal summon Refrain. Refrain is going to add Couplet to hand, which can't special summon anything because we don't have anything, but we can scale it to find Concerto. We can activate Concerto to fusion summon into Baka. Baka's going to summon from our deck the Chopina. And with Chopina on the board, we can use Refrain's effect to send Sonata to grave, Chopina to get the Sonata back, and Sonata's own effect to special summon itself out. We can then use the 2 as link material to go into Bloom Harmonist, which can get us both Soprano and Elegy. Soprano is going to return Chopina off of its first effect, Chopina returns Sonata off of her effect, and then we can fuse into Etoile. Baka's second effect, when sent to the graveyard, allows us to reborn the Soprano. Soprano is going to allow us to fuse with the Bloom Harmonist into a Schuberta, and this is going to be our end board for this combo. It gives us 1 piece of our lock, so all of our stuff is immune to destruction by card effects, and gets a bunch of attack. We get the triple DD Crow of Schuberta, we get Etoile to reset Schuberta, as well as protect our cards, bounce a bunch of stuff, etc, etc. Chopina is mostly just here as an extra big body. So, first movement solo gets us into a very similar end board to Refrain with 1 difference. We do not have to use our normal summon to get the combo rolling, which means that we are allowed 1 extra monster on the end board. Let's get going. So, we're going to activate first movement solo to summon Refrain from deck. Refrain is going to fetch us Couplet, you know this combo by now. Couplet is going to scale itself and activate to fetch us the Concerto. We can activate Concerto to go into Baka. Baka can get us Chopina from the deck, and both of our guys scale themselves. We can activate Refrain's second effect to send Sonata to grave. Chopina gets Sonata back, we special summon it, we link off into Bloom Harmonist. Bloom Harmonist can get us both Soprano and Elegy. Soprano can get back the Chopina for a Pendulum summon. Chopina can get back Sonata to once again special summon herself, and then we can fuse into Etoile. The Baka is going to get back 1 more time the Chopina. Chopina is going to get back the Soprano this time, because we can normal summon her and fuse off into the Schuberta while keeping our Sonata. Sonata is the 1 big difference on this board and just gets all of our creatures an extra 500 attack and defense, making us that much harder to beat in battle. So we're back with closing thoughts on our classically inclined fusion summoning divas. Honestly, I really like Melodious. They attack on a front that not a whole lot of decks do. Most decks are prone to trying to get out as many disruptions as possible, where this deck, hits a few and definitely has enough stuff coming out of hand to hit an opponent and go 1 for 1. That's not necessarily where their strength lies. Their strength lies in the Elegy Aria lock, or at least part of it, and for certain decks, 1 tower, Psychic and Punisher, Raid Raptor, can be incredibly difficult to get rid of, so imagine when the entire board is made up of that kind of card. I've taken this to locals, and I beat Tenpai just by putting the Elegy Aria lock on the field. They don't activate effects, so it doesn't matter if they can't activate effects. They can't be destroyed by black holes or Raigekis, and Tenpai does not play the cards that would actually deal with them, like Dark Ruler no more, because that would stop Tenpai's game plan. So that alone stops the entire strategy of that deck. Other than that, I will say I'm not sure the deck is terribly well positioned in the metagame right now just because of Malice. The deck does not like Dimension Shifter. It can do stuff through it, but it does not end with very much if the opponent drops a Shifter on us, and it's normally not enough to fight through. That said, if the opponent is on Malice and you know it, you do have sideboard options. You put in the Drolls and the Lanceas. Technically you could run 3 Lanceas and it might be optimal. And even outside of that, you could end on a Baka instead of a Schuberta, you go down the disruption of the Schuberta, which does not really matter. You don't want that kind of disruption against something like Malice. And it makes your Magnificat's effect unable to be countered, which is very important in that matchup. But all in all, it's a pretty solid deck with a good number of starters. It wouldn't mind having one more really good one, but that's okay because you have plenty of 2-card combos that work to get you going anyways. And you do get to play a significant amount of non-engine, including the very powerful Herald of Orange Light that very few decks actually get to play. So that's going to be it for the deck in the video, guys. Thank you very much if you stuck around and watched the entire thing. Please let me know how you feel about it in the comments below, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.